It's really great to see everyone here, and hopefully we're getting post-caffeinated after our break so that we're ready to have some fun, because this is kind of what I do for fun. I'm the kind of guy that you'd sit next to at a dinner party, and then you'd say, oh, what is it you do? I work in IT. And then I'll try and talk to you about IT for like the next 4 hours. You'll be like, oh God, does this guy do anything else? No, not really. Not really. Yeah, so you can see today I'm wearing quite boring clothes, and my kids moaned at me this morning about it. They said, Dad, that's not a very good outfit if you're going to go on stage. So I'm wearing red shoes that no one but the front can see, and I've got Christmas socks on because it's September. Is it September? Because it's October, so it's even closer than I thought. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about accelerating infrastructure as code and configuration management using CI on AWS. And I challenge anyone to get more terms into the title of a talk than that. That's about 6 terms, I think. That's really, search heavy. Okay. The big one that I want you to hold in your head today is whether you actually treat your infrastructure as code. And I don't mean, do you write code to deploy your infrastructure, but I mean, do you treat your infrastructure as code? And that's what I'd like you to kind of think about today. Just as a show of hands, is there anyone who thinks they treat their infrastructure as code? Okay, so I'm going to go, that's probably about 48%, which, as we know in the UK, is otherwise known as an insignificant minority. Too political? Yeah, it's too political. Okay, so really what I'm going to go through today, it's why you use infrastructure as code and configuration management, AWS as an API rather than just infrastructure provisioning, effective planning of it, the infrastructure development lifecycle, infrastructure as code and CI, and then pipelining inside AWS with code, star, tools, and Terraform. This is a bit about me. I work as a DevOps consultant. Hopefully, I'll learn what that means at some point. Largely what it appears to be is that I work with infrastructure as code, CI/CD, automation. I'm also a Docker community leader and a newly minted GitLab hero, and I've got 16 guitars. You can't borrow any, I need them all. And that's my Twitter stuff. I'm outside the Rila Monastery in Bulgaria there, very nice place. You should all visit it in the mountains. Lots of vineyards around there if you like wine. Why? It's a question that I ask myself a lot, Why do I agree to do presentations? Why did I wear red shoes? But really the big question that I'm thinking of today is, why do I even want infrastructure as code? There has to be a good set of reasons for me to basically write out my entire life like a book and then keep reiterating it every time. And I think that really the answer is that I want everything to be in Git, because Git is obviously the language of development. If we think about language evolution over time, English is quite a good language, but I think Git is probably better. And when we're using Git, this is what I'm using Git for. I'm using it for as much as I possibly can. I would rather that, I don't know if we can actually deliver sessions at the moment via Git, but you could certainly try and make a pull request against my sessions, and that would be great. So we're looking at our software, our infrastructure, our documentation, our marketing, our automation, our CI, our websites, all of our work, our communications, maybe all being inside Git. And that's why we're finding that infrastructure as code is really the term that we're using, because it's the way that we're being able to communicate with each other across time and space. Now, I could talk to you about the evolution of musical history and why we even have notes, but that's another talk entirely. But if you imagine the only reason that we use A, B, C, D, E, F, G is so we know what notes someone else was playing. And that's why we are writing everything down, so we are able to crystallize our thoughts into how we're working. My assumption is that most people already have an idea of infrastructure as code and what it is as being easily reproducible, disposable, consistent, and in a world where change is easy, cheap, and repeatable. Now, that's the consistent message that we're proposing with infrastructure as code. And especially it becomes more important when we imagine that, the cloud is really the operating system we're working on. There isn't another kind of future vision at the moment where we're going back to traditional infrastructure where everyone has to spend their time with headphones on in the cold in a dusty, boxy room that I did about 10 years ago, and I'm sure I was only there because they were scared the builders were going to steal the servers out the server room. But we have to remember that in this, we're not using it to bash people with the mallet of terms. So when I go into a meeting and I go, Kubernetes, and they go, well, yeah, I've thought of Kubernetes. I think Kubernetes is brilliant. And we go, yeah, I'm going to talk about Kubernetes. There is a purpose for all of our problems. There is a solution that we're working towards, and that solution doesn't really come with the word infrastructure as code, because that is a whole bigger thing that you have to take on as a team and as a workplace and get sign-off from other people. And it leads me into the idea of whether AWS Cloud is not really an infrastructure provider at all, whether it's just an API that we're using tools to program against. Because when we look at, certainly as we've moved into looking at much larger infrastructure estates, the blending between our traditional infrastructure, our value-added services, our operational methods, our development tools has all become really one entangled mess of API that we interact with, and we're interacting with it using infrastructure as code. And that's what I've just said on that slide. Brilliant. And it really gives us the reusability of the solutions. Now, obviously, I work in a consultancy where we get to reuse solutions quite a lot because most people, I'm sure it won't surprise you, have the same problems with a small variation. And at some point, I go in and I talk to them and say, I think there are a lot of value you can get out of this. I've got some little bits of code pipeline that I think are going to be really valuable to you, and I've already made them. So here you go, have some more code. That's a day's worth of charges, and you don't have to get someone in for 6 months to rewrite your pipelines just to get you back to where I could have already given you today. So the imagination of infrastructure of code is kind of a large idea, and in it we have the idea of infrastructure provisioning, where we're really getting a lot of resources, and then configuration management, where we're configuring those resources. Now, I put tools down. We've got Terraform on one side and CloudFormation, and then Ansible and Chef and Puppet on the other, and you'll see there's a blend in the middle because you can actually kind of do both with both tools, but my best efforts are to get people to think about using them for what they are specifically good at and not mashing them into being mashing one tool into being what you use as your answer for everything. And in that, really, there is a separation between what we have and how we configure it. Now, there is obviously this blending, but there's also the idea of running between an immutable state, hopefully, if we're going modern and cloud native and everyone's loving each other, and a mutable state more in configuration management. And so when we're looking at balancing our infrastructure as code ideas, we're kind of using this as a way of measuring what we are going to need to do in the future and at the moment and where we were in the past. And we move to this idea of really starting to understand the purposes behind us making the decisions that we make, because there have to be purposes behind what everything you're doing, or you're not validly making a decision. If I just say use Terraform and you go, brilliant, I'm going to use Terraform, and you go home and write a bunch of Terraform, and then you deploy that Terraform from your machine, then you're actually kind of missing the conceptual value of it. So you need to start to understand the assets you have, whether they're mutable or immutable. If you're doing all immutable stuff, then you probably don't need a configuration management tool. So you can entirely disregard Ansible as something that you're going to use if you're using the cloud as an operating system. Whereas if you're running a legacy estate, then you're probably going to need something that is configuration management, and you can use Terraform for that, but I would think that other tools can be more appropriately leveraged for your specific requirements. Hopefully we're not getting too much into management speak, but I always think that in actual fact, it's an area that people need to understand in the decisions they make, that there's always going to be risk in terms of there is a certain amount of risk that you are balancing every time you write a single line of code or a single idea comes into your head. You're already starting to evaluate what is the risk that you've got with using this. What is the reward you're going to get back? Either pretty much rewards come in two types. You're going to get money or you're going to get time. Now, pretty much if you're full-time employed or you're a consultant, then time equals money as well. So you've got money and money. But I think there's also another one that I've certainly dealt with larger organisations, that is about evaluating the impact of what you can do. And that doesn't have to be about time and money. It can be the political impact of understanding and really delivering that understanding to other people that gives the greatest benefit over time. And that's, unfortunately or fortunately, you are all in your position to give some essence of value to a company or another company that you're working for. I used to be a software developer. At least I think I used to be a software developer. I maybe still am. I don't know as I move out of being it because I do DevOps now, or because I've changed my job title, which I may change again after today to, if you look me up on LinkedIn, I might change it to DevOps Influencer. We'll see how it goes. If anyone reviews my session terribly, then I won't put that, obviously. Now, in terms of the infrastructure lifecycle that I think that we have the idea that we're going to provision some infrastructure, we're going to configure some infrastructure, we're then going to deploy some infrastructure as we're working forwards, we're then going to monitor that infrastructure, and in the end, we're going to destroy that infrastructure. I feel very sorry for you if you think that what you're making today is going to exist in 30 years, because it's not. It is all going to be destroyed. It's going to be thrown into the void of nothingness, and you need to be able to understand that that is going to exist. For all of your infrastructure projects that you ever make, they will not exist at some point. But the real value is that we get to iterate. So we get to keep going back from the monitoring bit to keep re-provisioning and configuring and deploying over and over again. Depending on your projects, that cycle is either 2 minutes or it's 60 years. I don't know if anyone has the real value of being able to work on, mainframe machines. They're meant to be destroyed at some point. We just don't know when that is, right? Hopefully we can keep eBaying the parts until they're all gone. I heard a really good story about rail companies getting lots of stuff from eBay because they couldn't get any of the parts to fix any of the train sidings or something like that, and it relied on a network of collectors of railway parts to be able to keep the railways functioning. If you use the rail, you may disagree that it functions, but... Okay, so we've got this software-defined infrastructure, and we have this idea that it is infrastructure as code. So what we start to do is we're able to match what we're writing in infrastructure of code to our versioning, to our issue management. to our change logs and to our auditability so that we are actually delivering code. I don't know, when I used to be a software developer, I would tag releases. How many people are running with tagged releases of their infrastructure? So they can say, I'm running version 1.5 in production, and we're testing version 1.3 in the dev environment, or whatever it is. So we've got like 4 people, 5 people. That's pretty good. So that's pretty good. I mean, it's a lot less than the people who said that they were running infrastructure as code at the start. That was about 48%, I think. And what we also get to do is that we get to make sure that things are repeatable and stable and secure and visible. And you'll find that the visibility is something that you may not need today, but the visibility is something that you may be essential to the running of your business in 2 years' time. And being able to understand what you did when you did it, when you are reviewing your costs with your boss to give you the budget to run the next project, and he says, why have you spent $300,000 more than you were meant to? And you say, oh, it's a change that we did. I don't know when we changed it, but Cost Explorer says, this has gone crazy in December the 25th. I'm sorry, guys. And he goes, that's it. Get out. It didn't really say that. He's a really nice guy, but... Okay, and then when we're looking at CI/CD, we really need to think of how we're doing continual deployment models, integrating our changes into our working environments with, the idea of iterative improvements and small things, and that everyone in the world loves pipelines. Now, if you have a product and you're thinking, oh, don't know what to call my product, probably call it pipelines. I think it's working for everyone at the moment. So yeah, get on that. I know a while ago, everyone think it was called cloud. I worked for a company called HeliCloud. Maybe if we call it Heli Pipeline, boom, new projects. When we think of pipeline tools, in my opinion, this is all in my opinion, right? You've got the idea that you can use AWS, so you can use code build and code pipeline. You can use ones that are more integrated into version control systems, so GitLab CI and Bitbucket pipelines, or you can use external tools like Circle CI, Travis, or Jenkins. My opinions towards Jenkins are summed up by Mayor. So yeah, hopefully you are loving Jenkins. And I don't know why you would not pick from either your infrastructure provider, AWS, or your version control system, which I'm going to include Circle CI on that because really there's not a separate tool to do that. I think if you're managing your CI in Jenkins, you're isolating that tool from people who actually want to use it. But maybe that's my opinion. But obviously there's also code build and code pipeline, and you're already in AWS, so you don't have to be sold another tool, and your management doesn't have to be sold another tool, and you get to leverage things that you're already using, Terraform maybe, to be able to keep building new code pipelines and new code builds that are really just the same thing over and over again because you're deploying Terraform. Okay, so in our pipeline-based infrastructure as code, we have, linting and building and deploying things to test, and then testing again, and then deploying things again, and then monitoring things, and then destroying things, because we have to remember that at some point we are likely to destroy it. And the pipelines give us the ability to secure our infrastructure all the way through, and we can generally call that term DevSecOps because it is being automated in terms of your security, and you're building that into your process for managing your infrastructure. You get the availability of code analysis and change management, compliance monitoring, threat investigation, vulnerability assessment, lots of other words that security people talk to me about. It's a bit sometimes, at least security sometimes appears to be a bit buzzword bingo. Compliance. Have you got compliance? Yes. What about vulnerability assessment? Brilliant. So you get to start building that in, and you're not having to replicate this every time. You're using a similar set of tools for almost all your projects. So when the next one comes along, or you need to iterate on that, you're leveraging existing workflows. Okay. So far I've talked very conceptually, and the value of concept is the fact that I get to sit here and say there is a utopia out there, or stand here. It just looks like I'm sitting because I'm short. In the real world, things are not always as perfect as you imagine them to be, and we have legacy things to work on. So I wanted to really give some idea of actual things that we're doing at the moment, and I think that they could be improved over time, but these are the actual processes we're running through with linting and building and planning, and then using Terraform compliance, and then testing with TerraTest, and then applying, and then destroying, because I would be missing a part if I wasn't destroying them. So this is really the setup of our code pipeline for doing things with Terraform. And you can see it's using a couple of extra tools in that. So we're doing a couple of extra things for testing Terraform. If you saw Anton's talk earlier, Anton's workshop, sorry, Anton, about testing tools. I'm sure he went into them much more comprehensively than I'm going to. But Terraform compliance is a relatively straightforward tool to say, yes, I'm doing this, no, I'm not doing that. And TerraTest is a bigger tool set to actually go and make things and then query the API to say, have I actually got the things that I think I'm going to have? But my caveat for this is do it on a separate account. Don't do it. Don't go, I'm going to put this in the middle of my pipeline and I'm going to deploy to production. And then at the end of TerraTest, it destroys your entire production estate. And you think, oh, I shouldn't have tested that out on production. Next time, I'm not going to. Unfortunately, that's not happened to me recently. Okay. I'm going to hope that some people have some idea of what AWS code star tools are. There's the idea of using build specs inside code build for really outlining how our builds are done. So that, we did 1 to 7. It's similar to each one of those processes is a separate code build projects, and then they transfer from one to the other. And so for us, the build spec files are all pre-created. Pretty much if you get us to write some code for you, we're going to be writing Terraform. We've already written lots of Terraform. We're going to be using that to deploy code pipeline things with build specs. And I prefer that we try and do separation of things like our compute and our storage and database and IAM, and so that we have smaller components to work on. And I always get a bit worried about projects where I look at someone and they have a gigantic stack that has everything in it, and I think, I don't want to touch that. It's too big. And in the code pipeline hierarchy, you've got this idea of one code pipeline that is being triggered by something at the start. It could be code commit, it could be an S3 bucket, or it can be pretty much anything if you provision some other CloudWatch event to happen on it. And the build specs are set up of pre-builds, builds, post-builds, and artifacts. Very much like other tools. So in our example one, in the pre-build, what we're doing is setting up the environment. We're saying we're going to start things. We're saying that we've got a current account. We're going to get an assumed role that has the ability to do this. And we're configuring our AWS CLI tools. So we've got a Docker container that's already, all these things are already existent in, and we're running that. And then we're actually running the commands that we want to run. So whether that's an apply or anything really, it doesn't really matter. I've given the example of an init and an apply in here. And you can see that we're doing an output of that so that we get to keep what we do. Now you see this is a progressionary move that we're also storing these artifacts so that we can properly version them in the future. And then with the post build, we're just saying that's finished. And our artifacts are coming out at the end so that we actually be able to build a history of what was deployed at what time. We have a plan of what was done. We could review that at a later point. We're able to version it. We are able to say it fixes these issues. And we are able to pass this over to other people to approve it, ourselves to approve it, another team to decide on it, a project owner to decide when we're going to release this version, and we will be able to successfully, hopefully successfully, roll these back if there was an issue with them. So what I'm trying to say is that there is an ability for people to codify all of these processes. And when you're running that kind of pipeline process, it's great to understand that there is obviously the reason we're doing it is so that everyone can see it and everyone can work on it. And we are coding things. The reason that written language works is because we're able to transfer that far, far further than if I just tell you how it works. And especially if we follow grammar certainly in English, if you follow grammar, it becomes easier to understand what people talk about. And the items that I really want you to think about whenever you're making a decision is that it needs to be easily reproducible, disposable, consistent, and that change is easy, cheap, and repeatable. And if you're not getting these values out of the decisions you make, then they're possibly the wrong decisions, or you're doing them for the wrong reasons. At the end, I want to think about value creation, because apparently we're in a value creation world, at least for whether you're making money or you're making value for startups. And the items I want to pull out is that all solutions, you need a reason to choose them. Infrastructure as code does give you the potential to build and alter things in seconds, and that's a great value, but it's also increases the risk that you have. And it's not complete if you're not doing it with automation. You've only done half a job if you're not automating it, and you are severely limiting the future value that you're going to create. You should be able to review and manage infrastructure like it's software, build on best practices, structure everything before you act, and focus on principles and let them choose the tools for you and not the other way around. So hopefully at the end you get to think either you're treating your infrastructure as code or you're not, and we've given you some ideas about how to work with that. And that's it from me. Thank you. Lots of credits.
You were to the second on time.
Well,
phenomenal.
That's our role.
Impressive. Any questions for Will? Great.
Hey, nice talk. I liked it a lot. Do you have any thoughts on how Terraform Plan could be used in a CI pipeline as a sort of method to determine whether you want to apply changes as part of your kind of your CI chain?
In some things, so normally I'd expect that we're making a plan and then you pull that plan out at a later point and actually apply it, so that you wouldn't apply without having a direct plan. So you can have it that people review that plan before it's actually applied and store that as an artifact. But that's, I mean, storing that as an artifact becomes part of your, internal infrastructure documentation, I guess.
I'm thinking about situations where you might commit a change which will delete a resource that you didn't intend to delete, and being able to detect that before your CI pipeline goes and destroys your infrastructure. And I've struggled with this in the past. Terraform Plan can tell you exactly what it's about to do, but how can you build the approval phase into an automated pipeline? I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
So from what I used to do was monitor, do a plan without actually necessarily approving things, and it would tell me, I'm going to delete this or not, and then I can have a manual step in there as well for if I'm doing my concerns with, unless you've got a really, really quick life cycle, then probably you want to approve changes to production. If you've got a minute change, then you maybe that's not going to get you value, but most places don't have that level of change built into them. So, yeah.
Cool. Thanks for your thoughts, sir.
Thanks.
One more question? You're around for a bit, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Good. Okay.
I'll be in the other room. I think,
Yeah.
probably, yeah.
Good stuff. Okay, thanks again.
Thank
Will,
you.
great talk.